Welcome back to the shop. So today we're going to go from looking like this to this. I think that looks pretty deadly. The question is it deadly? So let's talk about wheel spacers and why you may or may not want to run them on your vehicle. Aside from the fact that they cause cancer and reproductive harm. So I picked up these 1.5-inch spacers. Got them from Titan Wheel Accessories on eBay. It was about the only place I could find ones to fit our application. So you can see here, it's a 5x5 Chevy pattern. And these ones are hub Centric. And you can also see, it kind of sucks living north of the border. Typically pay more in shipping than we do in the actual product. But they were the only ones I could find that would work for us. I would have thought they would have been more common. I guess not a lot of people run them on these trucks. I guess the big question is, why am I running these? Well, I like the stance on this truck, but there's always been something about it that just didn't quite do it for me. And then I saw a photo on one of our truck sites, and I realized that's kind of the look I'm going for. I am toying with the idea of possibly swapping out the wheels on this truck at some point. The tires are getting up there in age. A few more years we're going to have to swap them out. And I would maybe like to go with a little bit bigger wheel and step away from the rallies for a bit. As much as I do love the rallies, you're pretty limited to your options. 15x8s are what we have on this truck. Now they do come 15x7 and 15x6 on the van wheels. And if you want to go aftermarket, you can get 15x10s, which is something I might look into. And I won't get into the details on all that, but if you pop over to It's the Chad, he did a video on rally wheels and all the differences, and pretty informative. So if you're looking at getting a set, be sure to check that out before you go out and buy something that possibly won't fit your application. So for now, we're just going to run these spacers, see if we like the look, see if the truck handles okay with them on there, we don't have any rubbing issues, and then we will eventually swap the wheels for something that will get us that look. And that really is your best option. I wouldn't go spacers just because you get the proper wheel setup. That is definitely the way to go. But plenty of guys run these on their drivers and don't have any issue. However, if you go on the internet, any of the forums or Facebook group, and ask a question about spacers, you will get a ton of feedback. And it seems 95% of the people will tell you that these things will cause your wheels to fly off and kill you and everybody around you. 3% of the people say they've run them for years, never had a problem. And about 2% of the guys will say that they've got 44s on their truck and they haul a 20,000-pound trailer regularly, and they've never had an issue. I don't know why there's such a huge hate on for these. There's never really any backstory with the failures that these people seem to talk about. It's always a friend of somebody's brother that had them on his truck, and they came loose and flew off. And I think the only real reason for that is improper install. This set here didn't come with any instructions of any kind. I pretty well leave it up to you. But if we look at this set of Transdapt adapters that we got for the 68 F100 to mount up those torque thrust rims, it clearly says remove any visible rust and prep the surface. So part of me wonders if the failures aren't just some kid going out and grab a set of spacers, throwing them on crusty old drums, and torquing them down, or not torquing them down. As you can see here, improperly seated adapters are hazardous and may cause spacer adapter failure. These ones also recommend putting a small amount of anti-seize on the vehicle lugs, which if you talk to anybody with any kind of wisdom, they will tell you never put anti-seize on your lugs. So I'm not sure why Transdapt recommend that. And if you actually look at some of the cheaper kits on Amazon or even on eBay, you will see that the spacers come with red Loctite. And that's always kind of been interesting to me, because you'd never actually put red Loctite on your lugs for your wheels, so why would you put them on spacers? Just doesn't make sense to me. I think it's just a case of CYA. They hope to hell that a little bit of red Loctite is going to be what saves you. Also says here, do not use an impact wrench. Part of me also wonders, people over torquing these, because if there's a risk of these coming loose, you better grab the old impact and torque it down to 300, 400 foot-pounds. I'll make sure they don't come loose. That's not how it works with torquing fasteners. For these 1/2 inch, it recommends a torque of 80 to 85 foot-pounds. That's more than adequate. And it also recommends here, retorque your lug nuts after 50 to 100 miles, and then again every 2 to 3,000. I think that's probably where the problems are coming in, is people aren't rechecking them. Even if you go to shop, get new tires, or have some work done on your vehicle, they will typically tell you to come back within usually a span of 20 to 30 miles and have the wheels retorqued. From my past experience, I always retorque my wheels after 20, 30 miles, and you will usually find one or two that aren't tight, or sometimes all of them. So, is it a fault of the wheel spacers or the adapters? I don't think so. If that was the case, big companies wouldn't be producing these anymore. You would see lawsuits, you would see the stuff on the news or in the paper, and personally, I never have. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, these are hub-centric. You'll typically see things listed as lug-centric or hub-centric. You may be wondering what that means. Well, the definition of centric is centered. So if we imagine this is our brake rotor or our drum, it is a little bit warped there on the one side. It's simply a matter of where this is located within that. And if it's eccentric, it would be off. Kind of like that guy that hangs out at the gas station late at night. So hub-centric is obviously the easiest way to obtain that. You can usually find one that'll fit your application. And if you can't, you can get spacers which will adapt your current hub size to the new size. Now, there is some misconception as to the other purpose of that. A lot of people seem to think that's for carrying the weight of the vehicle, and it's not. It's strictly for centering. You will often find wheels that are lug-centric. I had some on a SUV that I owned years ago. Actually took it in, had new winter tires put on, and at that time I was still under the understanding that it had to be hub-centric. Talked to the shop manager because I noticed there was quite a large gap. And he said, unless you have vibration issues, there's nothing to worry about. So obviously with hub-centric, it uses the hub of the vehicle to center, and this one is the correct size for our application. And then it also adapts it out so that our wheel will still fit that same size. Now, most wheels are lug-centric. This is a 1/2 inch stud here, same size as these are. And you can see the amount of gap there. As I'm sure most of you know, it uses the conical seat on the lug to center everything up. Which works for the most part, as long as you install properly. I like to just barely snug everything down, make sure everything's seated, and then go through, do your star pattern, and make sure everything seats up nice. So I typically like to go hub-centric if possible. Just pretty well eliminates all possibility of vibrations. As far as load carrying, the way that's obtained is through the studs, but not actually on the studs. And the old school wisdom tells you that if you don't run a hub-centric wheel or a spacer, that all the weight's going to be on these studs. And if you do some research, that's not quite the case. What happens is once you tighten these fasteners, they go into tension and apply a clamping load between the two faces. If your rotor or drum face was here. And this 1/2 inch fastener, torqued to 90 foot-pounds on a dry fastener, will yield about 10,000 pounds of clamping force. So when you go ahead and torque all your fasteners down to 90 foot-pounds, there's 50,000 pounds of clamping force between this spacer or wheel and the surfaces mounted to. And that tension and friction between these surfaces is what's supporting the weight of the vehicle. Now, like I said earlier, if you don't prep your drum or your rotor before installing this or any wheel, there's a good chance that the old wheel will have left a pattern behind with some rust ridges, or there might be some loose rust scale on there. And as this seats in as you go down the road, that could work its way loose. At which case, once your lugs come loose enough, these are going to be slamming around in here. And I think that's where the old wives' tale of not having hub-centric wheels or spacers will cause studs to shear off. So once they're loose and slamming around in there, it could certainly cause some damage. So I'm no engineer by any means, but that is kind of the basic principle of how these things work. And like I said, over-torquing these isn't going to do you any good. You'll stretch the fastener into a point of being stressed, and tighter isn't always better. If we end up sticking with the rallies, then these may end up becoming semi-permanent, but The other option would be to get those rallies widened, push us out another inch, inch and a half. But I think that'll probably be fairly expensive and probably not worth the hassle. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.